Greetings to you all and welcome to Chess Collab. Alfred is my name. Today we are just going to focus on the rook as the piece we just mentioned previously. So let's just dive into the rook. Remember, for white we have got two rooks, and also for black we have got two rooks. So today we're just going to focus on how it captures and also how it moves. In other words, by the end of this lesson, you should be able to use the rook on the chessboard, to use it when you are capturing, and also you should be able to move it on the chessboard during a game situation. But obviously today it will be just in isolation, as our main focus is on the rook. So let's just dive into our main conversation here. What you have to remember is the rook moves in a straight line along the board. In other words, so if the rook is on d4, as you can see there, it will be able to move to even to d1, d2, d3. So in other words, let me just quickly grab the pointer here so that you will be able to see what exactly I am referring to. You just grab the pointer, which is my laser here. So in other words, here. So that means this rook can go to this square, or to this square, or to this square. And even if it goes to the furthest square, that is regarded as one move. So please just take note of that. Right, let's move on. The rook can go backwards, forwards, and sideways. So in other words, when I'm saying forward, remember the rook in this setup, this white rook is moving from where the letters are. So it's moving towards that direction. So if I can describe this rook can move forwards. It's going that way, upwards, forwards. Then sideways, that means, all right, in other words, in this case, forwards and backwards. Then also sideways. So in this case, there we go, sideways, and also that other side, the sideway. Then also, it is a long range piece. What does that mean? It means that if it is there, it can move up to the other end there, and it is regarded as one move. So please take note of that. It can move from where it is to h4. It can move from where it is to a4, and so on and so on. Right. So also what you need to remember is rooks captures the way they move. So in other words, if it is there, if there is a piece here, it will just capture it. And in chess, we capture by replacing where the captured piece is. So we remove it, then we place, the piece which have captured it. We're going to see it as we go on. Right. Cannot jump over other pieces. So in other words, if another piece is on the way, it cannot move over. You're going to see, I'm going to give you a certain illustration so that you can see. And also it can only move on a clear path. If there's something on the way, it becomes limited. It cannot go beyond. Right? So I'm going to show you in this case, in this scenario, the first chessboard and the second chessboard, where you can see the blue circle, that means that's where the rook can move to and is regarded as one move. If it moves here to d6, that means it's one move. If it can go to e6, it's one move. So you can move it from here to there, then it's one move. If you move it from here to the furthest square, still that is regarded as one move. That's how the rook moves. Remember, I told you it moves in a straight line. So that's the straight line, that's the straight line, that's the straight line, that's the straight line. It cannot go diagonal. Remember, a rook moves in files. I'm adding another keyword here, files, and also it moves in ranks. So be it, and also here. So let me just draw my lines so that you can see what I mean. So in other words, this rook can go forward, can go backwards. Remember, black is moving, is regarded as moving from this side towards this side. So the rook can move forward and backwards. And also it can move sideways, as I've already told you. There it is. And also there, that means if it is there, it can go further to H8. Remember, whenever you're naming the square, we use the letter and the number. It can also move again backwards. So remember, I told you initially that white moves from where the letters are. But when it comes, when it's there, it will be regarded as moving backwards. So in chess, a rook can move backwards, forward, sideways. Then that's it. Then when it is capturing, I'm just going to give you a scenario where it is going to capture as well. So in this case, where can this rook go to? So if you have already indicated that it can go to A8, B8, C8, D8, E8, F8, G8, that means you're correct. So let's move on. Then this rook can also go along that way. And is regarded as one move. If it moves from H8 to H1, it's one move. Remember, I told you, it's a long range piece. Then we move on. Where can this rook go to? Especially on this one. Please, I'm going to give you some few seconds for you to think about it. Where can this rook go? In other words, if it is white to move in this case? Where can it land? Where can it go to? Right. I'm just going to give you the arrow. Those are the answers. You can go here, there, A4, A5, A6, A7, or A8. So one of the squares, that's where it can land. Remember, there is nothing on the way. There is nothing on the path. So that means it is able to move to those squares, right? Then also it can also go the other way around, the other side. That means sideways. In other words, here it can go forward. This is forward and sideways. As long as there is nothing. Remember, the furthest square it can go is regarded as one move. So please take note of this point. I've included here, and also I'm just emphasizing that that's how it is. Right. Let's move on to give you another example. Right. In this case, we do have a black rook here, and we do have a pawn there. We do have a pawn here. Can go beyond. Cannot go beyond. Remember, cannot go beyond, but can capture. Right. So in this case, if it's a black, as you can see, it's a black rook here, can choose one of the moves. So in other words, it can capture here or it can capture there. Or if it doesn't want, it can just be moving. Remember, in chess, you are not forced to capture, but there will be a situation where you are forced to capture. In that situation, that's where you'll be in check. In the event that you have to save your king as you capture, of course, you can go ahead with that. So, and remember, in terms of the rook, it captures any piece on its way, on its path. But remember, it cannot go beyond that piece. So in this case, it can capture F5, rook H5. So that means it captures on H5. And also, it can capture B8. So that's how it moves. If there is another piece on its way, it cannot move beyond that square. As I've already indicated, no matter what, no matter which piece, the opponent's piece or its own team. So in other words, in this case, if there was a black pawn here or any other black piece, it cannot go beyond that. In other words, it is blocked. If there is an enemy piece on its way, it can capture it, but it cannot move any further, just like what I've already demonstrated. right? So in other words, it cannot go there, G5. And also it cannot go to H5 because already there's a pawn, right? And also, as I've already indicated, so these are the solutions which I'm providing you to indicate that it can capture on F5. And also it can capture on B8. So in other words, these are the main components of the rook. And this is how the rook moves and how it captures. I am also going to cover at a later stage. I'm going to look at what we call castling. Castling is a very special move, chess. And also, I'm also going to prepare some exercises for you so that you can have a look at them. What can be done here? White to move. Try it. I'm going to give you some few seconds. White to move in this case. What can be done here? Try it. Well, if you've already indicated that, the rook can move forward. Well done for that. If you have also indicated that, the rook can capture D7. Great job. If you've already indicated in terms of those different positions, if in the event that you do not want to capture, that means you've done a good job. Great job indeed. And as I've already indicated, look out for self-check exercises to come. I'm going to share with you the exercises where you can also test yourself, and it will be self-marked. In other words, you test yourself and to see where you are, to see if you have mastered, to see if you remember how the rook moves. And remember to subscribe so that whenever I've uploaded another new lesson, then you'll be able to notify. Thank you so much for joining and enjoy the rest. Enjoy the rest of your day.